So if you've ever wondered if your job is at threat of being taken over by AI, then you might want to listen to this episode. That's because today we are going to explore what jobs have been taken over recently by AI and the jobs that stand to be taken over in the near future, along with some of the roles which are the hardest for AI to fulfill and take over entirely. And we're going to explore this topic with the help of Dale Smith. Dale Smith is the founder and EVP of Orchestral.ai, a company that provides data center operations and takes automation to a whole new level of effectiveness in taming the chaos and complexity of IT and business support infrastructure. Now, if you like this episode, some other episodes that you might enjoy from the Brains Bite Back selection of previous episodes are: who owns the rights to AI's new artistic talents, how AI is advancing surgery, and suicide prevention using predictive AI. My name's Sam Breakgear, and you're listening to Brains Bite Back, your podcast exploring the intersection between psychology and technology. Disclosure: this episode contains a client of an Espacio portfolio company.
My name is Dale Smith. I am one of the founding members of the team that includes Ravi Rao and Marshall Bartosik, founders of a company called Orchestral.ai. The company, the best way to describe what we are doing is our tagline, which is intelligent, autonomous infrastructure. So we're really focused on the mission of making intelligent, autonomous infrastructure a reality for some of the world's largest organizations who have very complex, unwieldy, difficult to manage IT infrastructure, and artificial intelligence plays a key role in our ability to do that. So that is what the company is really focused on. And my role within Orchestral.ai is really building the technology stack, the infrastructure, if you will, that supports all of our customer-facing operations, from marketing to sales operations to customer success, and ensuring that our customers have the best possible experience working with us. That's my role. I have a team of guys and gals that help me accomplish that outcome.
Thank you for joining me. I mean, I'm really looking forward to cracking open your brain and understanding so much more about AI, because we are here today to discuss what jobs will last in the face of AI and automation. Now, before we get into that, I would like to discuss what jobs we have seen AI already successfully take over in the past 10 years that were previously only done by humans. Now, could you share some of your thoughts on this, maybe examples?
Certainly. And when you scratch the surface, I think anyone will be overwhelmed by the amount of content and literature that's being churned out around the topic of AI, and perhaps even specifically around AI and the future of work. So what I have to share with you is, and your listeners, is a small sampling of what's out there. But some of the roles that I think are within easy grasp of AI technologies and involve routine, pretty standard manual task that will lend themselves to a programmatic approach, an algorithmic approach. For example, in the field of medicine, radiologists who are trained to detect patterns in the images, in medical images, may find that their roles in the first instance are augmented by AI technologies, but there's evidence to indicate that at some point the AI algorithms become so advanced, the AI technology becomes so advanced that it could actually replace some of what they do. Some folks may have seen articles about, in the field of transportation, truck drivers. I've seen, in fact, I think there's a startup, I don't remember the name of it, pardon me, it's in Texas, that actually came to market with a self-driving truck. The idea being that self-driving trucks obey the speed limit, they don't fall asleep. So the obvious appeal there is that costs and risk are greatly contained if you have an AI-enabled self-driving autonomous truck able to transport goods across vast distances unaided 24/7. So that's quite interesting. I think as a general statement, those roles that are within reach of AI today are the ones that are using some of the less advanced skills associated with humans. So, for example, many years ago, I lived in Copenhagen in northern Europe, and at that time, all of the metro trains were self-driving. There was no human involved, and 24/7 they would shoot around the city, making stops, picking up folks, dropping them off. And I think elsewhere in Europe too, you will see examples of trains and metro systems that are essentially driverless. So there's been a steady advance of AI in various forms throughout many industries for quite some years now. Probably one last example would be in the field of customer service. So increasingly, particularly folks that need to engage with a company around their product or service and go to the website, increasingly people will find that some form of AI-enabled customer service, customer engagement has been deployed that will receive the customer inquiry, try to determine what's the best way to handle it, including hand off to human for intervention, depending upon the nature of the customer inquiry. And I could probably go on forever at this anecdotal evidence of how AI is already augmenting, and in some cases has the potential to displace jobs which were previously done by humans. But it'll be highly variable across industries, and maybe that's something we can get into before we wrap up.
Yeah, definitely. And I have definitely noticed as well the rise of chatbots, as you kind of mentioned, I suppose. To start with, coming into like customer service, it seems like that's almost on the front line whenever you engage with any kind of company now in any form of like chat or conversation.
Right.
Yeah. And with regards to truck drivers, I remember first hearing about that, I think in the last presidential election, just because I remember Andrew Yang made so much noise about how there was going to be like truck drivers will be the next job and industry to be taken over by AI, like you mentioned. And that's crazy for me. Like I get it, but it's also incredibly scary to think that something so large that can move so fast will be not manned by a human or anything other than AI. But to be honest, I also have made this comment before where I reckon in maybe like 50 years or so, the concept of a human operating machinery, or the idea of a human operating a lorry or a truck, as you would say, would probably be more frightening than the idea of AI managing it.
Yes, because we know that being human, our shortcomings. Somebody gets a text message, looks over to pick up their smartphone, and in that instant, disaster could happen in just that small, flash, or the prospect of a truck driver falling asleep. I mean, that's got to be a key occupational hazard, particularly for long haul type routes. So that's the other side of it that makes you more welcoming of AI, or if not pure AI, then certainly I think I'd be more comfortable with the idea of some kind of augmentation, so that I think initially there were systems that would detect when the driver is getting a little drowsy and would make a loud noise, or maybe give them an electric shock to wake them back into consciousness.
Or like vibrate their chair very kind of like dramatically.
Yes, exactly.
So we talked about truck drivers or lorry drivers as like one of the jobs that we might see disappear. Are there any others that you anticipate being augmented or potentially completely taken over within the next 10 years?
I tend to fall into the line of thinking that AI will be, for a long time, transformative. So in the area in which Orchestral is focused, we're squarely focused on IT infrastructure and the complexity of managing that infrastructure. That complexity owing to the fact that equipment from different vendors is deployed in that infrastructure. That infrastructure traverses many different domains: storage, computing, networking, servers, applications, when you put all that together and you have specialized, skilled specialists managing all of that, you can begin to get a sense of how challenging it is to keep all of that infrastructure up and running, because that's what essentially runs the business. So I tend to take the view that AI will transform what most of these skills specialists do. In the first instance, that transformation will alleviate the tedious, mundane things that these folks have to do all day long. So, for example, if there was a fault or a failure somewhere within that infrastructure, instead of having some sort of alert or alarm generated without much context as to what has really happened, AI will have the ability in the first instance to give much more visibility and much more specificity around exactly what has happened that needs the attention of a human to intervene and remediate to some extent.
Yeah.
Later on, you can begin to imagine that going from simple alerting, what we refer to as root cause, to a kind of predictive response. So before something actually breaks, a human will be notified that some element of the infrastructure, perhaps it's a server or some sort of networking device that is out of spec. And all of the data that's being generated by that infrastructure is ideal for being able to provide some sort of insight into ahead of time before anything bad actually happens or anything actually breaks, providing some insight into what's actually happening. So in both of those stages, it's not that the human is being replaced. It's just the nature of what they spend most of their time doing. It changes. So I think for quite some time, we're going to see this transformative impact of AI and related technologies on the world of work. And I think it then becomes an interesting exploration, mental experiment of what's the end game. Once you've gone beyond alerting and root cause analysis and predictive remediation and these kinds of things, what comes after that? In the limit, as we say.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully you're enjoying the show, and if you are, make sure you subscribe and never miss an episode. You can find us on all your usual podcast sites: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, and a whole lot more, including YouTube. And we want to hear what you think, so be sure to leave us a review. Just search Brains Bite Back wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about a few times really the connection between how AI won't necessarily, immediately anyway, take over jobs entirely, but will help aid and assist people with jobs, or humans with jobs. And that's something that's been discussed a lot, that AI would essentially be a tool to work alongside humans rather than take over a lot of stuff. But I would also be interested to know, like, what jobs will be the hardest for AI to fulfill, and I'm talking like in their entirety. And what will these jobs will be the ultimately the last ones and the longest to survive in the hands of humans. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and what your opinion on this is.
I think the short and simple answer would be jobs that have the greatest amount or have the greatest need for emotional intelligence, creativity, judgment, to the extent that judgment is a quality that derives from experience and observation. So creativity, innovativeness, these are human qualities that are incredibly difficult to render algorithmically. It's difficult to render. I had a conversation recently with a neighbor on this very topic. The neighbor was of the opinion that AI is all-encompassing. And I took the counter view that those aspects of the human experience, which not submit themselves to equations and algorithms will continue to be outside of the AI realm. And I gave as an example the emotional response of a parent who sees their baby, their child, their toddler stand up and walk for the first time. How can you even visualize an algorithmic response to that? So some of the professions I think that fall into that category certainly fields in healthcare, nurses, senior care workers, those jobs where a great deal of emotional intelligence, empathy, these jobs I think will continue to be around for many, many years. Entrepreneurs and technologists who are required to bring together many domains of knowledge, insight, judgment, creativity in order to do what they do. I don't see AI replacing those roles anytime soon. And artists, even though I have seen some algorithms, some AI, there are some sites out there that will actually generate music. You give it some sort of input and it will generate music. That's very interesting. But the music has a certain quality to it that isn't quite the same as what we today associate with human-generated music. And I think the same is true for art. There are some websites out there where an AI will generate art for you given some kind of input. But in general, I guess the way to sum that up is it depends on the most long-lived human jobs will always have that element of emotional intelligence, feeling, the things which we associate with being human, because those things are just, and I hope I'm not wrong about this, but those things are just not amenable to an algorithmic formulation.
Yeah.
And I say that mindful that there somewhere out there in some lab, there's probably somebody working on something which will prove me wrong in that point of view.
We'll just have to wait and see.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
We did have an episode beforehand, which was quite interesting, and we kind of discussed the role of AI and art and its ability to produce music and art in general, and also the implications of like who owns the art and how it's really like the complexities around that. But I understand what you're saying, and as far as I'm aware, like at the moment, yeah, I don't think that the art that I've seen that's produced or music that I've heard that's produced by AI doesn't stand parallel with the stuff that we have today, which is human produced. So we'll see what that scientist working in their lab will produce. But until then, I think that's definitely an area which we still dominate.
Yes.
But I would love to ask you as the final question, like if AI does take over an increasing number of jobs and the rate of employment decreases for humans as a result, what could this mean for society economically and for those who are put out of work? Now, I know you're not an economist, but I'd still love to hear your thoughts on this.
Wow, that's a big one. I think there is some anticipation of this, which is readily observable around us even now and for some years already. I talked about two stages of AI. The first being one where AI augments, the second one being where AI enters into a more predictive capability. And if there's a third and a fourth and a fifth, then yes, the implications for humans and what we associate with modern human existence are pretty dramatic and probably bordering on almost dystopian, at least for a period of time. There'll be a period of time in which people will have to get accustomed and will need to reconceptualize what it means to live in a modern society. And every one of us, and I'm sure it's certainly true for all the listeners who will be listening to this program, we wake up in the morning and we think about things to do with our work, our profession. That's the centerpiece of that's the organizing principle for our lives. It's how we make money to pay the bills and take care of the necessities of life. If all of that is suddenly displaced, that's a big fat question mark black hole. But when I said earlier that there's already some early evidence of thinking around this, I was referring to the experiments in what's called universal basic income. UBI. And if you do the research and you say do a Google trend line research over time, you'll see that there's much more, an increasing amount of discussion around this. And there have been some experiments across Europe and Spain and Finland, and even in some areas in the US. The concept there is real simple. People are allocated a certain basic income to take care of their daily needs in the event of their displacement due to AI and related technologies. I think you'll find that the results are mixed. Some people, certainly in the beginning, would welcome the idea that, wow, I have free money. I don't have to worry about deadlines and going into an office and doing all the things that we normally associate with work. What could be better? But when you unpack that, that level of dependency would tend to remove a lot of our reason for being. And there are psychological implications to that I think are still being studied, and not much conclusive can say about it. The irony, there's a hidden irony here, and that is that as AI technologies make businesses more efficient and more productive, it opens up the question of who will actually be employed to consume the output of industry if many humans are displaced from the workforce due to AI. Now, that's the one thing I haven't seen much discussion on in the circles where these topics are taken up. But that's quite the conundrum. And I think ultimately you're going to see much more talk and much more policy prescriptions around the concept of universal basic income as we go through this transition phase of people getting accustomed to, or adapting to, not getting accustomed to, but adapting to the displacements that the AI inevitably seem to suggest at some point in the future. Not quite sure how far out that is. Mm-hmm. Some folks would say it's sooner than we expect, and perhaps that's true. Yeah. This is a big topic, and it's really incumbent upon everyone to take this seriously, mm-hmm. and at a minimum begin to understand a little bit about AI, what it is, how it works. Take a look at yourself and begin to understand what impact it could potentially have mm-hmm. on your current way of living, and begin now to anticipate reskilling and retraining. This is something people have to take on as a responsibility onto themselves. Otherwise, they may find themselves displaced without notice, and mm-hmm. I think that's the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, UBI looks like it has some promise. Admittedly, I too have seen the mixed results from it, which is a shame because in theory, I really like the idea of it. I think everyone does. Like you mentioned, I suppose on the surface, it looks like free money, but mm-hmm. also it looks like a tool or a solution to this problem. We'll just have to see how it goes. But I definitely think that work will be necessary. I remember seeing one psychology study which actually said 20 hours a week is the optimum amount of time to work, because I think anything less than that, you kind of get a sensation of, I don't know, maybe not feeling like useful. I certainly know that some people experience this when they retire, so I've heard. Yeah, it'll be strange, but it'll also be nice, the idea of us maybe striving to meet the optimal amount of working hours for human happiness rather than just working to pay the bills. That would be a nice future. Let's hope it turns out like that and not a dystopia that we've kind of touched upon briefly.
Yeah, it's interesting, this fine line between utopia and dystopia. This is something that has fascinated me for a long time. So, some visionaries who opine around AI will paint the picture of the 10 to 20 hour work week, and the rest of your time is spent painting and pursuing your hobbies and writing great books and finding cures for cancer and that sort of thing. And I scratch my head and ask myself, when was that ever true? When has that ever happened? It's certainly not in any historical timeline I'm familiar with. So I think the utopian vision is certainly good. It's certainly good marketing material, but it's a fine line between that utopian vision of the future of work in a world of AI and the more dystopian vision of the same.
Yeah. Now, Dale, that's really it for the show. We've come to our time, but I would love to know if people want to continue this or learn about the work you're doing. Are there social media channels they can follow you on, or is there a website that you want to send them to?
Certainly, folks can subscribe to the Orchestral.ai newsletter to keep up with what we're doing. And that's just simply Orchestral, ORCHESTRAL.ai. That's our website. And we also have a LinkedIn page. And if you just search on Orchestral.ai on LinkedIn, you'll find it. And that's where we've been reposting some of our blog posts and articles, admittedly with much more of a focus on the impact of AI with respect to IT infrastructure and how businesses are able to reap the rewards of introducing AI into their infrastructure operations. But I think this interview has given me an excuse to and a motivation to go beyond the narrow confines of IT infrastructure and explore some of these other implications of AI as we go forward.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm glad to have ignited a little fire in you to go down that path. And thank you again for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure having this conversation. And I wish you all the best with all the work you're doing over there.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with you anytime.
Growing a company has many hurdles, from securing funding to expanding your business capabilities to ranking better on search. Each business challenge is uniquely complex. The solution to these challenges is growth-focused digital PR and marketing, and that's where our sponsor Publicize comes in. Publicize sets itself apart from traditional PR companies. It does not charge large retainers or churns out press releases whether you've got a newsworthy announcement or not. Publicize builds on your business's online presence and gets high-quality PR and media coverage for startups and entrepreneurs who are priced out of a broken PR industry. And for a limited time only, exclusive to Brains Bite Back listeners, you can receive a social media assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/BBB. That's publicize.co/BBB. This is the end of today's show. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this and you want to hear more episodes just like it, then follow and subscribe to Brains Bite Back wherever you get your podcasts. We're also available on YouTube under the channel of our publication, The Sociable. Just search Brains Bite Back and you'll find all of our episodes there. We really love hearing what you have to say, so leave us a review on iTunes or on any other podcasting platform to let us know what you think. You can also reach out on Twitter at The Sociable. And finally, go to sociable.co where you can find all our episodes and plenty of articles on topics just like this. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, stay safe and stay healthy.